There's a voice that speaks without words, a presence that communicates through absence, a divine language written not in sound, but in the profound depths of silence itself. And most of us are too distracted, too afraid, too busy running from it to hear what it's trying to tell us. Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary minds in psychology and spirituality, understood something that modern society has desperately tried to forget. That silence is not empty. It's full of truths we're not ready to face, full of answers we're too afraid to hear, full of a divine presence that speaks most clearly when everything else falls away. Today, we're going to explore why God speaks to you through silence, what happens when you ignore this sacred communication, and how Jung's profound insights can transform your relationship with the quiet spaces in your life. Because here's the truth most people never realize. The silence you're running from is actually running toward you, carrying messages your soul desperately needs to hear. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth about the world we live in. We are drowning in noise, not just the physical noise of traffic, television, and technology, but the psychological noise of constant stimulation, endless scrolling, perpetual connectivity, and the relentless chatter of a mind that never stops running. Jung observed that modern civilization had created what he called a mass psychosis, where individuals lose touch with their inner selves by constantly projecting their attention outward. We fill every moment with something: music in our ears, screens in our faces, conversations that go nowhere, activities that mean nothing. We've become addicted to distraction. But here's what most people don't realize. This addiction to noise isn't random. It's a defense mechanism. We're not just seeking entertainment or connection. We're running from something that terrifies us more than any external threat ever could. We're running from ourselves, from the uncomfortable truths that surface when everything gets quiet, from the questions we don't want to answer, from the feelings we don't want to feel. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And in our modern world, we've perfected this avoidance. We've built an entire civilization designed to ensure you never have to spend a single moment alone with your thoughts. But here's the problem with running. You can never run far enough. The silence is always there, waiting. And the longer you avoid it, the louder it becomes. Not in volume, but in urgency, in consequence, in the toll it takes on your life. Carl Jung had a unique perspective on silence and the divine that bridged psychology and spirituality in ways that were revolutionary for his time and remain profound today. Unlike Freud, who reduced religious experience to neurosis, Jung recognized that the spiritual dimension was an essential component of human wholeness. Jung understood God not as a distant figure in the sky, but as what he called the self with a capital S. The self, in Jungian psychology, is the totality of the psyche, the center and circumference of consciousness and unconsciousness combined. It's the divine spark within you, the organizing principle of your entire being, the voice of ultimate wisdom that transcends your ego. And how does this self speak? How does God communicate with you? Not through burning bushes or thunderous proclamations, though those might happen in rare moments. No, the self speaks most consistently and most powerfully through silence, through dreams, through intuitions, through the symbolic language of the unconscious that emerges when you finally stop filling every moment with noise. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But before you can truly meet another, before you can encounter God or the universe, or whatever name you give to that which is greater than yourself, you must first meet yourself. And that meeting can only happen in silence. In his famous work, The Red Book, which Jung created during a period of intense introspection, and what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he documented his own journey into silence. For years, He withdrew from the noise of his professional life and descended into the depths of his own psyche. What he found there transformed not only his life, but the entire field of psychology. He discovered that silence is not passive. It's active. It's creative. It's where transformation happens. In silence, the ego finally stops dominating the conversation, and the deeper wisdom of the self can emerge. So, what exactly is God or the self, or divine wisdom trying to tell you through silence? What are these messages that we're so desperately avoiding? First, silence reveals your shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow represents all the parts of yourself that you've rejected, repressed, or refused to acknowledge. The anger you pretend you don't feel, the desires you've labeled as inappropriate, the fears you've buried under layers of bravado, the weakness you've hidden behind a mask of strength. In the noise, the shadow stays hidden, but in silence it emerges. And this is terrifying for most people, because facing your shadow means facing the aspects of yourself you've spent your entire life running from. But Jung understood something crucial. What you don't acknowledge doesn't go away. It just gains power over you from the unconscious. The shadow that's ignored becomes projection. You see in others what you refuse to see in yourself. It becomes self-sabotage. The hidden parts of you undermine the goals of your conscious mind. It becomes illness. The repressed material manifests as psychological and even physical symptoms. But when you meet your shadow in silence, when you acknowledge it, when you integrate it, something miraculous happens. You become whole. You reclaim the energy you were using to repress parts of yourself. You stop being controlled by unconscious forces. You become authentic. Second, silence reveals your life's true direction. Jung spoke extensively about what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who society, your parents, or your culture told you to be. But you can't discover your authentic path when you're constantly consuming other people's voices, other people's opinions, other people's definitions of success and meaning. In silence, your own inner voice finally has a chance to speak. Your intuition, your deeper knowing, your soul's true calling. This voice doesn't shout. It whispers. It suggests. It nudges. And if your life is filled with noise, you'll miss it entirely. How many people have ignored the quiet voice telling them they're in the wrong career? The gentle intuition that a relationship isn't right? The persistent feeling that there's something more they're meant to do? They ignore it because acknowledging it would require change. It would require courage. It would require trusting something that can't be measured or proven or justified to others. Third, silence reveals the sacred. Jung understood that humans have an innate religious function, a deep need for meaning, connection, and transcendence. But the sacred doesn't typically manifest in the marketplace or the mall. It manifests in silence, in stillness, in the moments when your ego finally relaxes its grip and something greater can enter. Every mystical tradition across every culture and every era has understood this. The Buddhist meditation hall, the Christian monastery, the Islamic practice of Khalwa, the Hindu practice of Mauna, the Native American vision quest. All of them recognize that divine communion requires silence. In silence, you experience what Jung called numinous moments, encounters with something that transcends ordinary reality. These aren't necessarily dramatic experiences. Sometimes it's just a profound sense of peace, a feeling of connection to something vast, an intuition that there's an intelligence, an order to existence that your rational mind can't fully grasp. Now, let's talk about what happens when you continue to ignore the silence, when you keep running from the messages it's trying to deliver. Jung had a term for what happens when you live disconnected from your deeper self: neurosis. But not neurosis in the casual way we use the term today. Jung saw neurosis as fundamentally a spiritual problem. It's what happens when you're living a life that's out of alignment with your true nature, when you've betrayed your own soul in favor of external validation or comfort or safety. The first consequence of ignoring the silence is the loss of meaning. You can have everything society says you should want, the career, the relationship, the house, the accomplishments, and still feel empty, because meaning doesn't come from external achievements. It comes from internal alignment. It comes from living in accordance with your authentic self, which you can only discover in silence. Jung observed that many of his patients, particularly those in the second half of life, suffered not from any clinical disorder, but from what he called the meaninglessness and aimlessness of their lives. They had succeeded by every external measure and failed by the only measure that truly mattered, the internal one. The second consequence is increasing psychological fragmentation. When you refuse to integrate the messages emerging from your unconscious, when you ignore the shadow, the dreams, the intuitions, the quiet voice of your deeper self, you become divided. Part of you is trying to maintain the persona, the mask you show to the world. Another part is screaming from the depths that something is wrong. This fragmentation manifests as anxiety, depression, addiction, physical illness, relationship problems, and a general sense that you're living someone else's life. You're performing a role rather than being yourself, and the performance becomes exhausting. The third consequence is what Jung called enantiodromia, a Greek term meaning running toward the opposite. Jung observed that when you suppress something too long, when you stay too far from your center, the psyche will eventually swing violently in the opposite direction. The person who maintains perfect control suddenly has a breakdown. The one who denies all emotion explodes in rage. The one who avoids solitude becomes unable to tolerate company. The psyche is self-regulating. If you won't listen to the whispers, it will eventually shout. If you won't pay attention to the gentle guidance of silence, you'll eventually be forced into it through crisis, illness, or collapse. And finally, there's the ultimate consequence. You reach the end of your life, having never really lived it, having never encountered your true self, having never heard the voice of God speaking through the silence, having spent your entire existence running from the very thing that could have saved you. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But the alternative is even more terrifying, to reach the end and realize you never even tried." So how do you stop running? How do you begin to listen to what silence is trying to tell you? Here are the practices that Jung himself used and recommended. First, create intentional silence. You must deliberately carve out time away from noise, distraction, and stimulation. This isn't optional. It's essential. Start with just 10 or 15 minutes a day. Sit in a room with no phone, no music, no distractions. Don't try to meditate or achieve any particular state. Just sit with yourself. At first, this will be uncomfortable. Your mind will race. You'll feel anxious. You'll want to reach for your phone. You'll remember 100 urgent things you need to do. This discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing it right. The discomfort is all the noise you've been using to avoid silence finally surfacing. Stay with it. Let the thoughts come. Let the feelings arise. Don't judge them or try to change them. Just observe. This is the beginning of developing what Jung called the observing ego, the part of you that can witness your own psychological process without being completely identified with it. Second, engage with your dreams. Jung considered dreams to be direct communications from the unconscious, letters from the self. Keep a dream journal by your bed. When you wake up, before you check your phone or start thinking about your day, write down whatever you remember from your dreams. Don't worry about understanding them immediately. Don't rush to interpret them using some dream dictionary. Just record them. Over time, you'll begin to notice patterns, symbols, themes. you'll start to recognize the language your unconscious speaks, and you'll realize that your dreams have been trying to tell you something all along. Third, practice active imagination. This was one of Jung's primary techniques for engaging with the unconscious. Find a quiet place. Close your eyes. Let an image, feeling, or fantasy arise spontaneously. Then, instead of dismissing it or analyzing it, engage with it. If an image appears, enter into dialogue with it. If a feeling emerges, give it a voice. Let it speak to you. This isn't about making things up. It's about allowing what's already there in your unconscious to emerge and express itself. Some of the most profound insights and transformations come through this process. Fourth, spend time in nature without distraction. Go for a walk without your phone. Sit by water. Stand among trees. Jung understood that nature mirrors the unconscious. It's wild, uncontrolled, following its own laws rather than human laws. In nature, separated from the artificial noise of civilization, it's easier to hear the voice of the self. Fifth, develop a relationship with solitude. Not just absence of others, but genuine solitude. Time when you're not consuming content, not producing anything, not trying to accomplish or achieve, just being. Jung spent significant periods of his life in his retreat at Balingen, where he could work with stone, be near water, and exist in simplicity. You don't need to build a tower by a lake, but you do need to find your Balingen, your place, your practice, your rhythm of regular retreat from the world's noise. Sixth, work with a symbol or practice contemplation. Choose a symbol, image, or question that resonates with your current life situation. Not something you understand, but something that holds meaning you can't quite articulate. Spend time contemplating it in silence. Let it work on you. Let associations and insights arise naturally. Jung understood that symbols are the language of the self. They communicate meanings that can't be fully captured in rational language. By working with symbols in silence, you're opening a channel of communication with the deeper layers of your psyche. What happens when you finally stop ignoring the silence? What awaits on the other side of this confrontation with your own depths? First, you discover who you actually are, not the role you play, not the identity you've constructed, not the person you pretend to be, but your authentic self. Jung called this process individuation, becoming the individual you were always meant to be, and it can only happen through this journey into silence. This authentic self might surprise you. It might not be who you thought you were or who you wanted to be, but it will be true, and there's a profound relief in finally living from truth rather than from performance. Second, you gain access to genuine creativity and wisdom. Jung understood that the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed material. It's also the source of creativity, insight, and wisdom that transcends the ego's limited perspective. When you open yourself to silence, you open yourself to this deeper intelligence. Artists, writers, scientists, and innovators throughout history have reported that their greatest insights came not from effort, but from allowing, from creating space for something beyond their conscious mind to emerge. This is what happens in silence. Third, you develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites and allow a third thing, a synthesis, to emerge. In silence, you can hold contradictions that your rational mind wants to resolve. You can be both strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, independent and connected. This capacity to embrace paradox, to sit with tension without rushing to resolution, is one of the marks of psychological and spiritual maturity, and it's developed in silence. Fourth, you begin to experience synchronicity more frequently. Jung's concept of synchronicity refers to meaningful coincidences, moments when the outer world mirrors the inner world in ways that can't be explained by causality. When you're attuned to the silence, when you're connected to your deeper self, you become more aware of these moments and more able to recognize the patterns and meanings they reveal. Fifth, you find peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out or having achieved all your goals. The peace of being aligned with yourself, of no longer being at war with your own nature, of having integrated the parts of yourself you were rejecting, of living from your center rather than from your periphery. Jung once wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The silence is not trying to punish you. It's not empty or meaningless. It's trying to wake you up. It's trying to show you who you really are. It's trying to connect you with the divine intelligence that's been guiding your life all along, that you've been too busy to notice. God speaks to you through silence, because silence is where truth lives, because silence is where the ego finally stops controlling everything and something greater can emerge, because silence is where you finally stop performing and start being. Every moment you spend running from silence is a moment you spend running from yourself, from your potential, from your wholeness, from the life you're meant to live. The invitation is always there. The silence is always waiting, not as an enemy to be feared, but as a friend bearing gifts. Gifts of self-knowledge, gifts of wisdom, gifts of peace and meaning and connection to something greater than yourself. Jung's final message to us is this: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that journey doesn't begin with noise, achievement, or accumulation. It begins with silence, with the courage to finally stop running and listen to what the quiet has been trying to tell you all along. So today, tonight, tomorrow, find a moment. Turn off the noise. Sit in the silence. And listen. Really listen. Because God is speaking to you. Your deeper self is speaking to you. Your soul is speaking to you.